My new stepsister copied my whole life and lied about it online. Her whole fantasy life collapsed at her own engagement party. My dad married Wendy, and her daughter Tessa became my stepsister. Tessa immediately started copying everything about my life, but pretending she'd always been this way. I'd post about my trip to Japan, and 20 minutes later, Tessa would repost my exact photos with captions like, "Missing my favorite sushi place in Tokyo. Been going there since I was 12. She'd never been to Japan. She'd never even had sushi until she moved in with us. She'd take my childhood photos from our family albums and post them as herself. Throwback to my equestrian days under a photo of me at horse camp. Always been a piano prodigy, with my recital picture. My dad and Wendy thought it was sweet that Tessa wanted to be like me. She admires you. Take it as a compliment, Dad would say, while Tessa posted my honor roll certificates with her name photoshopped over mine. She'd listen to my phone calls, then post about experiences I was planning, as she'd already done them. I'd mention wanting to try rock climbing, and an hour later, Tessa had a whole post about being an advanced climber. The mountains are my second home, she'd write under stock photos. She started showing up to my college classes, telling people she was auditing them for fun. She'd sit next to me and repeat everything I said in discussions, but louder. When the professor complimented my analysis, she'd say, "That's exactly what I was thinking." Great minds, right, sis? She'd take selfies in my room with my things, then post them as her room. My designer bags became her collection. My awards became her achievements. My friend group became people she'd known for years. She even started telling my personal stories as her own. My volunteering at the animal shelter became her life-changing summer-saving puppies. She'd steal my prescription glasses to take photos even though she had perfect vision. "I just don't like wearing them all the time," she'd tell people who asked why she never wore glasses except in photos. She copied my study abroad applications and tried to submit them as her own. Got caught when the school called asking why 2 identical essays were submitted from the same address. Tessa cried to Wendy that I'd copied her, even though my application was submitted 2 weeks earlier. "Timestamps can be faked," she claimed. The situation escalated when I started dating Oliver. Tessa immediately claimed she'd been talking to him first. She'd comment on his posts like they were inside jokes. "Remember that night?" On random photos. Oliver was confused because he'd never spoken to her before we started dating. She started showing up to our dates claiming coincidence. "What are the odds? This has been my favorite restaurant for years." She'd never eaten there before. She'd sit at the next table, taking photos to post later, like she was on her own date. She'd crop Oliver's shoulder or hand into frame to make it look like they were together. She made fake text conversations with someone she saved as Oliver's name and would show people. He texts me constantly. It's actually too much sometimes. The texts were just her messaging herself from a second phone she bought. She'd post about our song, which was actually my and Oliver's song. She'd check in at places we went on dates minutes after we left, posting "perfect evening with my special someone," with strategically vague photos. Then came the breaking point. I got engaged to Oliver at my birthday dinner with both families present. It was perfect and intimate. Tessa looked furious but fake smiled through the congratulations. 3 days later, she announced her own engagement on social media, to someone named Oscar whom nobody had ever met or heard of. She posted a ring photo that was clearly my ring photographed on her hand. Same angle, same lighting, same manicure I'd gotten. Oscar was supposedly traveling for business, which is why nobody could meet him. She started planning an elaborate engagement party, telling everyone Oscar would fly in for it. She copied every single detail from my planned engagement party. Same venue I'd booked, same caterer, same color scheme. She'd literally called, pretending to be me to get the information, then booked everything for the day before mine. "I want to celebrate first since I got engaged first," she told everyone, even though everyone was at my engagement when it happened. The night of Tessa's party arrived. 100 guests showed up to meet the mysterious Oscar. Tessa wore a white dress identical to one I'd bought for my party. She'd even styled her hair exactly like mine from my engagement photos. She kept checking her phone, saying Oscar was delayed at the airport. At 9 p.m., 3 hours into the party with no Oscar, Tessa announced he'd had an emergency and couldn't make it. But she wanted to share their love story anyway. She started telling the exact story of how Oliver and I met, word for word, including details only we would know. That's when Oliver stood up. "That's interesting, Tessa. Because that's exactly how I met your sister. Down to the coffee shop on 5th Street and the book she was reading." The room went silent. I can't see anyone except Tessa anymore. Every face in this room has turned toward her and the air feels like it got sucked out through a vacuum. Her skin goes from normal to paper white in about 2 seconds flat. She's standing there with her mouth hanging open, making this weird gasping sound like a fish out of water. Her hands are shaking so bad that her phone almost slips out of her grip, and she clutches it tighter like it's the only thing keeping her from falling over. I watch her eyes dart around the room, looking for someone, anyone, who might believe her or help her, but every single person is just staring with this mix of confusion and shock on their faces. Bradley pushes his chair back and stands up next to Oliver, and the scraping sound of the chair legs on the floor is so loud in the silence that half the room jumps. He pulls out his phone and starts scrolling through it really fast, his thumb moving up and down the screen. He clears his throat and his voice comes out steady and clear when he talks to the whole room. He says he's known Oliver since they were sophomores in high school, and they've been best friends for 8 years. He says Oliver has told him about every single person he's dated, every crush, every awkward first date, everything. He looks right at Tessa and says Oliver never mentioned anyone named Tessa until 3 months ago, when she became his girlfriend's stepsister. Bradley pulls up his phone and shows the screen to the people nearest him, pointing at dates and text messages. He says the timeline Tessa just described is completely impossible, because Oliver was actually in a relationship with someone else during that whole period. He even says the girl's name and shows photos of Oliver with her from that exact time. The people who can see Bradley's phone start whispering to each other and showing their neighbors, and this wave of understanding moves through the room like someone dropped a stone in water. Tessa's face somehow gets even whiter, and now she's shaking her head really fast, making these little choking sounds. Alicia raises her hand from across the room like we're in class or something, and normally that would be funny, but right now everything is too tense for anyone to even smile. She says she needs to add something important because she can't stay quiet anymore. She explains that she's been following my Instagram for years, since before I even started college, and she's seen every post I've ever made. She says she watched Tessa create her account just 4 months ago and immediately start reposting my exact photos. Alicia pulls out her phone and starts scrolling through screenshots she saved. She holds up her phone and shows everyone these side-by-side comparisons of my posts and Tessa's posts, with Tessa's always coming exactly 20 minutes after mine with slightly different captions. She says she's been screenshot saving everything because the whole thing seemed so weird and obsessive, and she wanted proof in case anyone ever needed it. She swipes through dozens of examples, showing my Japan photos next to Tessa's identical Japan photos, my horse camp pictures next to Tessa's fake equestrian posts, my piano recital next to her piano prodigy claims. People are pulling out their own phones now, probably going to look at Tessa's account themselves, and the room fills with this buzzing energy of everyone checking and whispering and gasping. Tessa finally finds her voice and it comes out all high-pitched and shaky. She says everyone is confused and jealous of her happiness, that people are twisting things around because they can't stand to see her succeed. Her voice is shaking so badly that some of her words come out slurred together, and she keeps swallowing hard between sentences. Someone from the back of the room, I can't even see who, asks her to show photos of Oscar on her phone since he's supposedly her fiancé. Tessa's whole body goes stiff and her eyes get really wide. She starts swiping through her phone frantically, her fingers slipping on the screen because her hands are sweating. She's stammering something about privacy and respect and how it's inappropriate to demand to see her personal photos. But the way she's moving is pure panic, jabbing at her screen and scrolling so fast that nothing could possibly register. She holds the phone against her chest and says, "People need to respect boundaries," but her voice cracks on the word boundaries and everyone can see there's nothing to show. The desperation is rolling off her in waves and I can see sweat forming on her forehead, even though the room isn't hot. Michaela stands up from her table near the windows, and I didn't even know she was here until this moment. She smooths down her dress and takes a deep breath, and something about the way she's holding herself makes everyone go quiet again. She says she needs to share something that might help people understand what's happening. She explains that she went to high school with Tessa in Arizona, and they graduated the same year. She says the Tessa she knew back then was nothing like the person standing here tonight. She describes a quiet girl who ate lunch alone in the library, who never traveled anywhere except one family trip to the Grand Canyon, who definitely never did any of the activities she's been claiming. Michaela says Tessa never had a boyfriend in high school, never went to parties, never had the adventurous life she's been posting about online. She says Tessa was actually really shy and had maybe 2 friends total, and the person she's pretending to be now is completely made up. She looks almost sad when she says it, like she feels bad for exposing Tessa, but knows it has to be done. The room explodes into shocked muttering, and I can hear people saying things like unbelievable and this is crazy, and I knew something was off. Wendy shoots up from her chair so fast it tips over backward and crashes to the floor with a bang. She's yelling at everyone to stop attacking her daughter, her face turning red and her hands balled into fists at her sides. She says this is all a misunderstanding, that people are ganging up on Tessa because they're jealous and cruel. Her voice gets louder and shriller with every word, and she's pointing at different people around the room like she's accusing them of crimes. My dad stands up slowly and puts his hand on Wendy's arm, really gentle, and she whips around to look at him with wild eyes. He says her name quietly, just Wendy, and then he looks past her at Tessa. His voice is so soft that people have to lean forward to hear him, but it cuts through all the noise like a knife. He asks Tessa to please explain the coffee shop story, because he knows for a fact that's exactly how Oliver and I met. He says he was there that day. He saw the whole thing happen. He even took photos of us talking for the first time. The hurt in his voice makes my throat tight, and I can see his eyes getting shiny with tears. He's trying not to cry. He says he thought Tessa just looked up to me, that she admired me and wanted to be like her big sister. But now he's seeing something much darker and more disturbing. Wendy's mouth opens and closes, but nothing comes out, and she looks between my dad and Tessa like she's trying to find an answer that doesn't exist. I watch Tessa's whole world fall apart right in front of me. She looks around the room at all these people staring at her with disgust and pity and shock on their faces. Her carefully built lies are crumbling like a sandcastle in the waves, and she can't stop it or fix it or explain it away. Her eyes fill with tears and her face crumples, and suddenly she lets out this awful sobbing sound that's half scream. She turns and runs toward the exit, her heels clicking frantically on the floor and her white dress streaming behind her. Wendy shoots everyone these furious glares, her eyes landing on me for a second with pure hatred, and then she takes off after Tessa, calling her baby, and wait. The door slams behind them, and for a moment nobody moves. Then everyone starts talking at once, pulling out phones and comparing notes and sharing stories about Tessa's weird behavior. I hear people saying things like she told me she studied in France, and she claimed we went to camp together, but I've never seen her before, and I knew those photos looked familiar. The volume in the room rises as people piece together just how big Tessa's lies were, and I'm standing there feeling like I'm underwater, everything muffled and strange. Oliver wraps his arm around me and pulls me against his side, and that's when I realize I'm shaking all over. My teeth are actually chattering even though I'm not cold, and my legs feel weak like they might give out. He rubs my arm and asks if I'm okay, and I can't even answer because I'm feeling too many things at once. Relief that people finally believe me, validation that I wasn't crazy or overreacting, anger at how long this went on, sadness that my family is broken. Oliver keeps holding me while I try to breathe normally, and I can feel his heartbeat steady and strong against my side. My dad walks over to us looking like he aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. His shoulders are slumped and his face is gray, and when he looks at me, his eyes are full of tears. He says he's so sorry, and his voice breaks on the word sorry. He says he should have believed me when I tried to tell him what was happening, that he dismissed my concerns and made me feel crazy when I was telling the truth the whole time. He says he thought Tessa just admired me and wanted to be close to me, but now he sees it was something much more disturbing and unhealthy. He reaches out like he wants to hug me but stops himself, asking with his eyes if that's okay. I nod and step into his arms, and he holds me tight while whispering sorry over and over into my hair. Oliver steps back to give us space, and I can feel my dad crying against my shoulder. The venue coordinator approaches us with this really awkward expression on her face, wringing her hands together. She asks what we want to do about the party since there's all this food and decorations and no guest of honor anymore. She looks genuinely confused about the protocol for this situation, which would be funny if everything wasn't so intense. Before anyone can answer, I hear Bradley's voice from across the room suggesting we stay and celebrate my actual engagement instead. A few other people pick up the idea and start agreeing, saying it seems wrong to waste all this food and let Tessa ruin the whole night. The suggestion spreads through the crowd like wildfire, and suddenly everyone is looking at Oliver and me with hopeful expressions. Oliver squeezes my hand and leans down to ask quietly if I want to turn this disaster into something positive. He says we don't have to, that we can leave right now if I want, but his eyes are warm and encouraging. I look around at all these people who just stood up for the truth, who believed me and validated my reality after months of being gaslit. I think about Tessa running out in tears while I stay here surrounded by people who actually care about me, and something shifts inside my chest. I nod and tell Oliver yes, let's stay, and his whole face lights up with this huge smile. He announces to the room that we're staying and everyone should help us celebrate our real engagement, and the energy in the room completely transforms. The uncomfortable tension drains away and gets replaced with this genuine excitement and happiness. People start moving toward us to offer congratulations, and several guests come up to apologize for not questioning Tessa's stories sooner. They say things like, I should have known, and the signs were all there, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I tell them it's okay, that Tessa was really good at manipulation, and I understand why people believed her. Bradley climbs onto a chair and raises his glass, calling for everyone's attention. He makes this beautiful toast about truth and real love, about how the best relationships are built on honesty and authenticity. He talks about watching Oliver and me fall in love for real, with no games or lies or pretending. He says our love is the kind that lasts because it's based on actually knowing each other, not some made-up fantasy. Everyone raises their glasses and cheers so loudly that the sound bounces off the walls and fills the whole room. People are clapping and whistling, and someone starts chanting, "Kiss, kiss, kiss," until Oliver dips me backward and kisses me right there in front of everyone. When he pulls me back up, I realize I'm crying. But these are completely different tears than before. These are happy tears, relief tears, tears that come from finally being seen and believed and celebrated for who I actually am. The party wraps up around midnight, and Oliver drives me home while I stare out the window replaying everything that happened. My phone keeps buzzing with texts from people at the party, but I can't bring myself to look at them yet. Oliver walks me to my door and kisses my forehead before asking if I want him to stay, but I tell him I need some time alone to process everything. He understands and makes me promise to call if I need anything. I lock the door behind me and sink onto my couch, finally letting myself feel the full weight of what just happened. My stepsister's entire fake life just collapsed in front of 100 people, and somehow I feel both relieved and exhausted at the same time. 3 days pass before I check my social media, and when I finally open Instagram, Tessa's account is completely gone. Not just deactivated, but actually deleted like it never existed. I scroll through my own feed and see all the places where she used to comment and tag herself in my photos, but now those interactions have vanished into nothing. Alicia texts me asking if I've seen it yet, and when I say yes, she sends me a whole folder of screenshots she saved over the past few months. Seeing them all together like this makes my stomach turn, because the scope of the copying is even worse than I remembered. Every single photo, every caption, every fake story about her life is right there documented in Alicia's screenshots. Years of fabricated experiences just erased like they never happened. My dad calls later that afternoon and asks if he can stop by to talk. His voice sounds tired and older somehow, and I tell him to come over even though I'm not sure I'm ready for this conversation. He shows up 20 minutes later carrying coffee from my favorite shop, which feels like a peace offering. He sits down across from me and explains that Wendy took Tessa to stay with her sister in another state because the social fallout has been really intense. Apparently, people have been calling Wendy's phone nonstop asking questions about Tessa's lies, and someone even showed up at their house demanding to know if Oscar was real. My dad rubs his face with both hands and admits he had no idea things had gotten this bad with Tessa's behavior. He says he thought it was just normal stepsister rivalry and admiration, not full identity theft. My phone doesn't stop buzzing for the next 2 days. Messages pour in from people I barely know, all wanting to share their own stories about Tessa's lies. A girl named Sarah from my study abroad program sends me a long message explaining that Tessa contacted her on Facebook 6 months ago, claiming they'd been roommates in Paris. Sarah was confused because she'd never met Tessa, but Tessa kept insisting they'd lived together and asking for photos from the trip to post on her own account. Sarah thought maybe she'd forgotten someone from the program and felt bad, so she sent a few pictures. Now she feels terrible for enabling Tessa's lies and apologizes about 15 times in the message. Then a guy named Justin from Oliver's gym reaches out through Instagram. He tells me Tessa approached him at the gym last year and started talking about their relationship, except they'd never dated or even spoken before that moment. She showed him fake text conversations on her phone and talked about places they'd supposedly gone together. Justin thought she was confused or maybe hitting on him in a weird way, so he just avoided her after that. But now he realizes she was building a fake dating history to make her life look more interesting online. He sends me screenshots of posts where Tessa checked in at restaurants with captions like "Great date night," on the exact same days Justin was actually there with his real girlfriend. The messages keep coming from different people with similar stories. Someone from my biology class says Tessa copied her entire lab report and tried to turn it in as her own work. A girl who works at the coffee shop near campus says Tessa came in asking detailed questions about me and Oliver, like what we ordered and when we usually came in. A guy from Oliver's work reveals that Tessa showed up at their office building once claiming to be Oliver's cousin and asking the receptionist questions about his schedule. Each new message makes me realize that what I saw was just the tip of the iceberg. Tessa's deception went so much deeper and involved so many more people than I ever imagined. Oliver comes over that evening with takeout, and we spread everything out on my coffee table while I show him all the messages I've been getting. His face gets more and more serious as he reads through them, and finally he puts his phone down and admits something he's been holding back. He tells me there were several times over the past few months when Tessa's behavior genuinely scared him. She'd show up at places they couldn't possibly have known we'd be, like the hiking trail we picked randomly one Sunday morning, or the bookstore 3 towns over that we drove to on a whim. Oliver started thinking maybe she'd put a tracking device on his car or hacked into his phone somehow. He varied our routine specifically to try to avoid her, changing restaurants at the last minute and taking different routes home. He didn't want to worry me more than I already was, so he kept it to himself and just tried to protect us both. I feel anger rising in my chest that he had to deal with that alone, but also gratitude that he took it seriously when my own family didn't. Oliver reaches across the table and takes my hand, and we sit there for a long time just processing everything together. He tells me about the time he caught Tessa sitting in her car outside his apartment at 2 a.m, just watching his windows. When he confronted her, she claimed she was lost and looking for a friend's place, but his apartment is at the end of a dead-end street. There's no reason to be there unless you're specifically going to one of the units. He started parking in the covered garage after that, instead of on the street, and he'd check his rearview mirror constantly while driving to make sure she wasn't following him. My dad texts the next morning asking if I'm free for lunch, just the two of us. I stare at the message for a while before responding because I'm still angry about how he dismissed my concerns for months. But I also know he's trying to make things right, so I agree to meet him at a quiet restaurant downtown. He's already there when I arrive, sitting in a corner booth looking uncomfortable and sad. We order food and make awkward small talk about the weather and my classes until finally he just breaks down. His voice cracks as he admits that Wendy was very defensive whenever he brought up Tessa's behavior, and he chose keeping peace in his marriage over protecting me. He says he convinced himself I was exaggerating or being dramatic because it was easier than dealing with Wendy's anger. Every time he tried to talk to her about Tessa's copying, she'd accuse him of favoring me and not accepting her daughter, so he stopped bringing it up and told himself it would work itself out eventually. My dad wipes his eyes with his napkin and says he was wrong and he wants to do better going forward. He explains that watching Tessa's lies explode at the engagement party forced him to see the truth he'd been avoiding. His daughter was stalked and gaslit by her stepsister, and he did nothing to stop it because he was too afraid of conflict with his wife. The guilt in his voice is obvious, and I can see he means what he's saying. But I also need him to understand how much damage his dismissiveness caused. I take a deep breath and tell my dad that I appreciate the apology, but he needs to understand how isolated and gaslit I felt when my own parent wouldn't believe me. For months, I tried to explain what Tessa was doing, and he kept telling me I was being paranoid or jealous or too sensitive. He made me doubt my own reality and question whether I was the problem. Every time I brought up something Tessa did, he'd find an excuse for her or tell me to be more understanding. I felt like I was going crazy because the evidence was right there, but nobody would acknowledge it. My dad nods slowly and says he's been doing research about identity theft and psychological manipulation, trying to understand what happened. He's read articles about people who become obsessed with copying others and how it's actually a serious psychological issue, not just admiration or flattery. He pulls out his phone and shows me some of the articles he's bookmarked, and I can see he's genuinely trying to educate himself. Then he asks me something he's never asked before. He wants to know what I need from him going forward. Not what he thinks I need or what would make things easier for him, but what would actually help me feel safe and supported. It's the first time he's actually asked instead of assuming, and something shifts in my chest. I tell him I need him to believe me when I tell him something is wrong, even if it's uncomfortable or creates conflict with Wendy. I need him to prioritize my safety over keeping the peace. And I need him to acknowledge that his dismissiveness over the past few months caused real harm that's going to take time to heal. He writes everything down in his phone notes and promises he's going to do better. Over the next week, my dad's phone rings constantly with calls from Wendy. He tells me she's alternating between defending Tessa and acknowledging something is seriously wrong. One evening, he asks if he can put her on speaker with my permission because he thinks I need to hear what she's saying. I agree reluctantly, and Wendy's voice fills my apartment sounding strained and defensive. She talks about how Tessa has always struggled with self-esteem and identity issues, even as a child. She never felt like she was good enough or interesting enough compared to other kids. Wendy says she never imagined it would go this far, that Tessa would literally try to steal someone else's entire life. But then her tone shifts and she starts talking about how I have such a perfect life with my achievements and relationship and supportive family. There's an undercurrent of blame in her voice, like somehow my existence caused Tessa's behavior. Like if I'd just been less successful or less happy, Tessa wouldn't have felt the need to copy me. My dad jumps in and tells Wendy that's not fair or accurate, but she keeps going. She says Tessa felt invisible next to me and just wanted to feel special for once. I feel my hands clenching into fists, because she's making excuses again instead of holding Tessa accountable. Having low self-esteem doesn't give someone the right to steal another person's identity and stalk their boyfriend. But I stay quiet and let my dad handle it because I don't trust myself to stay calm if I start talking. After Wendy hangs up, my dad apologizes for her attitude and says she's having a hard time accepting that her daughter needs serious help. He sounds exhausted from being caught between his wife's denial and the obvious reality of the situation. I spend the weekend going through all my social media accounts and making everything private. I remove Tessa from my followers and block her on every platform. Then I go through my privacy settings and restrict who can see my posts, my photos, my location tags, everything. It feels empowering to set these boundaries and take back control of my online presence. But part of me also worries it looks like I'm hiding, or that people will think I did something wrong. Alicia comes over to help me and reminds me that protecting my peace isn't hiding, it's self-care. She says I don't owe anyone access to my life, especially not someone who used that access to hurt me. We spend hours going through my accounts together, and she helps me understand all the privacy settings I didn't even know existed. Oliver suggests we go ahead and start planning our actual engagement party for a few weeks out. He says we should invite the people who matter most to us and celebrate our engagement on our own terms, not letting Tessa's disaster define this milestone for us. The idea feels right somehow, like we're reclaiming something that was stolen. We spend a happy afternoon looking at venues on our laptops, and this time we deliberately choose everything different from what Tessa copied. Instead of the fancy hotel ballroom she booked, we look at casual outdoor spaces with string lights and picnic tables. Instead of formal catering, we talk about food trucks and barbecue. We want something that feels authentically us, not some generic, elegant party that could belong to anyone. Oliver keeps making me laugh with ridiculous venue suggestions like a trampoline park or an escape room, and I realize this is the first time in months that planning something fun doesn't come with anxiety about Tessa ruining it. 2 weeks after the confrontation at Tessa's fake engagement party, an email appears in my inbox from her personal address. My finger hovers over the delete button because I don't know if I'm ready to hear from her. But curiosity wins, and I open it to find a long, rambling message that jumps between different tones and topics. She starts by apologizing for everything that happened and saying she knows she hurt me. But then the next paragraph justifies her behavior by explaining how invisible she felt her whole life. She writes about watching me have everything she wanted and feeling desperate to be me instead of herself. Then she swings back to apologizing before pivoting to subtle blame again. She mentions how easy my life has always been, and how I don't understand what it's like to feel inadequate all the time. The email goes on for pages like this, back and forth between taking responsibility and making excuses. The whole thing is unsettling because even now, even after everything exploded publicly, she still doesn't seem to fully grasp why what she did was wrong. She seems more upset about getting caught than about the actual harm she caused. I screenshot the email and send it to both Oliver and my dad. We all agree that Tessa needs professional help that's way beyond what family support can provide. My dad calls me later and says Wendy has finally agreed to get Tessa into therapy, though she's still resistant to the idea that this is a serious psychological issue requiring long-term treatment. He sounds absolutely exhausted from being caught between his wife's denial and the obvious reality that their daughter has major problems. He tells me Wendy keeps saying things like, Tessa just needs time to mature or she's going through a phase. But my dad has been firm that this isn't normal behavior, and Tessa needs real professional intervention. The strain in his voice makes it clear this has been causing major problems in their marriage. But at least he's finally standing up for what's right instead of just keeping the peace. Alicia texts me 2 days later asking if I want to come over for a girls' night at her place. She mentions that a few other friends who were at the engagement party disaster want to hang out, and I figure why not. When I arrive at her apartment, I find 5 other women already there, all people I know from college or through mutual friends. They all witnessed Tessa's complete meltdown firsthand. We order pizza and open wine, and within minutes everyone starts sharing their observations about Tessa's behavior over the past few months. One girl admits she always thought something was off about Tessa's social media posts because the photos looked weirdly familiar. Another says she saw Tessa taking pictures in my room once when she stopped by to drop off notes for me. They all noticed things but didn't want to say anything because they worried about making family gatherings awkward or seeming jealous. We end up laughing about the absurdity of the whole situation, how Tessa literally invented a whole boyfriend and planned an entire party around someone who didn't exist. Someone brings up how women are taught to ignore their gut feelings to keep the peace, and we have this really deep conversation about why we all saw red flags but stayed quiet. It feels good to process everything with people who get it, who saw what I saw and can validate that I wasn't crazy or overreacting. By the end of the night, I feel lighter than I have in months. My dad calls me the next morning and asks if he can stop by my apartment. When he arrives, he looks tired but determined about something. He sits down at my kitchen table and tells me that he and Wendy have scheduled their first couples counseling session for next week. I'm honestly shocked because my dad has never been the therapy type. He explains that the whole situation with Tessa revealed serious problems in how he and Wendy communicate and handle conflict. He admits that he let Wendy's strong personality override his own judgment about Tessa's behavior, and he realizes now that he chose keeping peace in his marriage over protecting me. His voice cracks a little when he says he needs to work on standing up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable. He tells me the counselor specializes in blended family dynamics and that they're committed to doing the work. I tell him I'm surprised but really glad he's taking real steps instead of just apologizing and moving on. He asks if we can have lunch together once a week, just the two of us, to rebuild our relationship. I agree because I can see he's genuinely trying, and that matters more than I expected it to. Oliver suggests we visit his parents for dinner that weekend, and I'm nervous about it because I haven't seen them since before everything exploded. His mom greets us at the door with warm hugs, and his dad shakes Oliver's hand while smiling at me. We sit down to eat, and about halfway through the meal, Oliver's mom brings up the engagement party incident. She asks how I'm doing emotionally with everything that happened, and her concern feels genuine rather than nosy. I give her an honest answer about how violated I felt having my identity stolen, and how validating it was to finally be believed. She nods thoughtfully, and then shares that she had a similar experience years ago with a friend who became obsessed with copying her life. She describes how the friend would buy the same clothes, take the same vacations, even tried to date her ex-boyfriend. Her understanding and validation mean more than she probably realizes, because it helps me see that what happened wasn't just weird family drama, but an actual pattern of behavior that other people have experienced. Oliver squeezes my hand under the table, and his dad changes the subject to lighter topics. The rest of dinner flows easily, and when we leave, his mom hugs me tight and whispers that I'm handling everything with remarkable strength. 3 weeks pass after the engagement party disaster, and I'm starting to feel like I can breathe again. Then Wendy calls my phone one afternoon. I stare at her name on the screen for a long time before answering. She asks if we can talk in person, and my first instinct is to say no. But something in her voice sounds different, less defensive and more broken. I tell her I'll meet her at a neutral coffee shop downtown, and I immediately text Alicia asking if she can come with me for support. Alicia agrees without hesitation. When we walk into the coffee shop 2 days later, I spot Wendy sitting alone at a corner table. She looks like she's aged 5 years since I last saw her. Her hair is pulled back messily, she's not wearing makeup, and there are dark circles under her eyes. The moment she sees me, tears start streaming down her face. Alicia and I sit down across from her, and Wendy just cries for a solid minute before she can even speak. Wendy finally composes herself enough to talk, and what comes out is a confession I wasn't expecting. She tells me that watching Tessa's fabricated life collapse at the party forced her to confront things she's been avoiding for years. She admits that Tessa showed concerning behaviors even as a child, like claiming other kids' accomplishments as her own at the school. She describes how Tessa would come home and tell elaborate fantasy stories about things that never happened, and Wendy always dismissed it as an act of imagination. When Tessa was in middle school, she got caught copying another girl's art project and submitting it as her own. Wendy made excuses to the school about Tessa being stressed and needing extra support. She thought Tessa would grow out of it and didn't want to label her daughter as having problems. Wendy's voice shakes as she explains how she convinced herself that moving to a new place and joining our family would give Tessa a fresh start. Instead, it gave her new material to copy. The regret in Wendy's voice sounds genuine, and she keeps apologizing for not protecting me when I tried to tell her what was happening. She admits she was so desperate for her daughter to be okay that she ignored reality. I listen to everything Wendy says, and while I feel some sympathy for her position as a mother, I also feel anger rising in my chest. I tell her clearly that her denial enabled Tessa to escalate her behavior from childhood fantasies to full-scale identity theft. I explain that I felt gaslit and alone when my own family wouldn't believe what I was experiencing. Alicia sits quietly next to me, providing silent support while I speak. I tell Wendy that I need space from both her and Tessa right now, and any future relationship will require Tessa to be in serious treatment and show real change over time, not just a few therapy sessions. Wendy nods and says she understands, though I can see it hurts her to hear. She tells me Tessa is staying with relatives out of state and has started seeing a specialist who deals with personality disorders. She promises she won't push for contact or try to force reconciliation. When we leave the coffee shop, Alicia links her arm through mine and tells me I handled that perfectly. I feel drained but also proud of myself for setting clear boundaries. Oliver and I spend the next week finalizing plans for our actual engagement party. We sit together at my kitchen table with notebooks and laptops, making lists and checking venues. The guest list is deliberately small and intimate, only about 30 people who've been genuinely supportive through everything. We choose a beautiful garden venue on the edge of town that's completely different from the generic hotel ballroom Tessa copied. The garden has winding paths, old trees with string lights, and a small gazebo where we can do toasts. We pick a casual menu with food stations instead of formal plated dinner. Everything reflects our actual style and interests, not some cookie-cutter elegant party. Creating something that's truly ours feels like reclaiming my identity after months of having it stolen piece by piece. Oliver keeps making jokes about adding ridiculous elements like a bouncy castle or a taco truck, and I laugh harder than I have in weeks. When we finally book everything, I feel genuinely excited instead of anxious. My dad shows up at my apartment unannounced one evening, and I can tell immediately he has news. He sits on my couch and tells me that Wendy and Tessa will be staying with relatives for at least another month while Tessa starts intensive therapy. He looks relieved when he says it, like a weight has lifted off his shoulders. He admits the house feels peaceful without the constant tension and walking on eggshells around Tessa's behavior. He tells me Tessa's therapist recommended she stay away from social media completely and avoid contact with people from her old life while she works through her issues. My dad asks if he can attend our engagement party, and his voice is tentative like he's worried I'll say no. I look at him and see genuine remorse and effort to make amends. I tell him yes because I can see he's really trying to do better. He tears up a little and thanks me for giving him another chance. Before he leaves, he hugs me tight and promises he'll never dismiss my concerns again. The morning of our real engagement party arrives, and I wake up feeling genuinely excited instead of the dread I felt before Tessa's fake party. Oliver stayed over the night before, and we get ready together in my apartment. He keeps stealing glances at me while I do my makeup, and when I ask him what he's looking at, he tells me how proud he is of how I've handled everything with grace and strength. The way he looks at me makes me feel seen and valued for who I actually am, not some fabricated version someone else created. I put on the dress I originally bought for my engagement party, the one Tessa never got to copy. Oliver helps me zip it up and kisses my shoulder. We drive to the garden venue together, and the whole way there, he holds my hand and tells me this is going to be perfect, because it's real. Our engagement party is absolutely perfect in its simplicity and authenticity. The garden setting is more beautiful than the photos showed, with late afternoon sun filtering through the trees and flowers blooming everywhere. The food from the stations is delicious, and every single person there is someone who knows and loves us for real. People mingle naturally, laughing and sharing stories. Bradley finds us during cocktail hour and gives Oliver a brotherly hug before pulling me into one too. Later, he stands up to give a speech about genuine friendship and true love, and his words are so touching that there's not a dry eye in the garden. He talks about watching Oliver and me build something real based on honesty and trust, and how rare that is. My dad approaches me during dinner, and his eyes are red from crying during Bradley's speech. He thanks me for letting him be part of this special day, and tells me he's grateful to see me so happy. I hug him and tell him I'm glad he's here. As the sun sets and the string lights turn on, Oliver and I stand together under the gazebo, surrounded by people who actually care about us, and I feel completely at peace. In the evening, Alicia grabs my arm and pulls me toward a quiet corner near the garden fountain. She holds up her phone with this excited look on her face and starts scrolling through posts. People have been sharing photos from our party on social media, and the comments section is full of supportive messages. Someone wrote about how refreshing it is to see an authentic celebration after all the fake drama from Tessa's party. Another person commented that real love and genuine happiness are obvious when you see them. Alicia keeps scrolling and showing me more posts, and I notice several people specifically mention how different this feels from Tessa's event. The truth really does have a way of coming through eventually, even when someone tries to bury it under lies. I lean against the fountain edge and just take it all in, realizing that people saw through Tessa's act even when I thought nobody noticed. 4 days after the party, I walk to my mailbox and find a plain white envelope with no return address. My name is written in handwriting I don't recognize at first, but when I open it, I see Tessa's signature at the bottom of a handwritten note. The card is simple and the message is brief. She writes that she's in treatment now and starting to understand why her behavior was so harmful. She doesn't expect me to forgive her but wants me to know she's working on herself. The note surprises me because it actually sounds self-aware instead of defensive or manipulative like her previous messages. I stand there in my kitchen holding the card and deciding what to do with it. Part of me wants to throw it away immediately, but another part recognizes that this might be the first honest thing Tessa has ever said to me. I fold the card back into the envelope and put it in my desk drawer instead of the trash. Oliver and I sit together on my couch the next weekend with wedding planning books spread out on the coffee table. For the first time, I don't feel anxious about making choices or sharing ideas. We flip through venue photos and discuss what kind of ceremony we want, without me constantly looking over my shoulder or worrying about someone copying our plans. Oliver suggests a date in late spring, and I agree immediately because it feels right for us. We bookmark pages showing outdoor venues with natural settings and start making notes about what matters most to us. The freedom to make these choices without fear feels like taking back the last piece of my life that Tessa tried to steal. Oliver reaches over and squeezes my hand while we look at photos of a garden venue we both love. We talk about keeping the wedding small and intimate with only people who genuinely care about us. Every decision we make together feels like building something that belongs completely to us. My dad calls 3 days later and asks if Oliver and I can come to dinner at his place. His voice sounds nervous when he makes the invitation, which immediately puts me on alert. We arrive at his house that evening and he's cooked our favorite meal, which he only does when he has something important to discuss. We sit down at the dining room table and my dad takes a deep breath before speaking. He tells us that he's asked Wendy to hold off on moving back home until Tessa completes at least 6 months of therapy. He says he loves his wife, but he needs to prioritize creating a safe environment for everyone, including me. His hands shake slightly as he talks, and I can tell this decision wasn't easy for him. Oliver and I exchange glances across the table. I reach over and touch my dad's arm and tell him I'm impressed by his backbone. He tears up a little and admits he should have set these boundaries much sooner. The relief in his face is obvious when I tell him I appreciate what he's doing now. That night after we get home, I pull out my laptop and open a blank document. I decide to write my own letter to Tessa. Not to send, but just to process everything I'm feeling. My fingers move quickly across the keyboard as I write about the violation of having my identity stolen piece by piece. I describe the gaslighting of being told I was overreacting when I knew something was seriously wrong. I write about the relief of finally being believed after months of feeling invisible. The words pour out of me in a stream and I don't stop to edit or reconsider. I write about watching Tessa wear my life like a costume and claim my experiences as her own. I describe the confusion of seeing my own photos posted as someone else's memories. Writing it all out helps me understand that while I might forgive Tessa someday, I don't owe her access to my life going forward. When I finish, the document is 4 pages long and I feel lighter than I have in months. I save it in a folder on my computer but don't print it or send it anywhere. My phone buzzes 2 days later with a message from Michaela asking if we can meet for coffee. I agree and we meet at a cafe near campus the next afternoon. Michaela looks uncomfortable when she sits down across from me and immediately launches into an apology. She explains that she recognized Tessa immediately when she saw her at college, but didn't connect the dots about the copying behavior until the engagement party. She says she feels guilty for not warning me sooner about who Tessa really was. I stir my coffee and tell Michaela she's not responsible for Tessa's choices. She seems relieved but still bothered by the whole situation. We talk for over an hour about the signs she noticed and the strange behavior she witnessed. Michaela mentions seeing Tessa taking photos in my classroom seat and posting them as her own study sessions. She describes watching Tessa repeat my comments in class discussions word for word. By the time we finish our coffee, Michaela seems less burdened and I feel validated knowing someone else saw what was happening. Oliver comes home from work 3 weeks later with huge news. He got the promotion he's been working toward for months and his face is glowing with excitement. We decide to celebrate by going to our favorite restaurant where we had our first date. Sitting across from him at the same table where we first connected, I realize how much stronger our relationship became through everything with Tessa. He never doubted me or made me feel crazy about what I was experiencing. He always stood up for the truth even when it was uncomfortable. I reach across the table and take his hand and tell him how much his support has meant to me. Oliver smiles and says going through this challenge together showed him exactly who I am under pressure. The waiter brings our food, and we toast to his promotion and to building a life based on honesty and trust. The restaurant feels different now, like we're starting fresh with all the confusion and chaos finally behind us. My dad calls me the following week while I'm grocery shopping. His voice sounds both relieved and tired when he tells me that Tessa's therapist has diagnosed her with a personality disorder that explains the identity issues and copying behavior. He says Wendy is finally accepting that Tessa needs serious long-term treatment, not just a few counseling sessions. I stop my shopping cart in the middle of the aisle and listen as he explains what the therapist told them. The diagnosis gives a name to the problem and provides a clear treatment plan moving forward. My dad sounds hopeful for the first time in months that Tessa might actually get better with proper help. He admits he's exhausted from being caught between his wife's denial and the obvious reality of the situation. I tell him I'm glad they're taking this seriously now, and that I hope the treatment helps Tessa find her own identity. Alicia texts me the next Saturday asking if I want to go bridesmaid dress shopping. We meet at a bridal boutique and spend the afternoon trying on dresses and laughing at some of the ridiculous options. The whole experience feels joyful and drama-free in a way I didn't know wedding planning could be. Alicia tries on a dress with enormous puffy sleeves, and we both crack up at how absurd it looks. We find the perfect dress after about 2 hours, and I'm struck by how normal and happy this feels. This is what planning a wedding should be like, surrounded by people who genuinely care about you and want to celebrate your happiness. Alicia spins around in the dress we chose and asks if I'm sure about the color. I nod and tell her it's perfect. We grab lunch afterward and talk about the wedding timeline and her role in the ceremony. Everything feels easy and natural without the constant worry about someone sabotaging or copying my plans. 2 weeks later, my dad calls again with another update about Tessa. He tells me that her therapist believes she's made enough progress that she's ready to write me a proper apology letter. His voice is tentative when he asks if I'm open to receiving it. I pause and think about the brief note Tessa sent after her party, and how surprisingly self-aware it seemed. I tell my dad yes, I'm willing to receive the letter, but I need time to decide if and when I'll respond. Setting this boundary feels healthy and right. My dad thanks me for being open to hearing from Tessa, and says he understands I need to protect myself. He doesn't push for more than I'm willing to give. After we hang up, I sit on my couch and think about what this letter might say, and how I'll feel when I read it. Oliver comes home and finds me lost in thought. I tell him about the call, and he wraps his arms around me and says whatever I decide about responding will be the right choice. The letter arrives on a Tuesday afternoon while I'm sorting through wedding magazines at my kitchen table. I recognize Wendy's handwriting on the envelope, but the return address is from a treatment facility 2 states away. My hands shake a little as I open it, remembering the rambling email Tessa sent right after her party disaster. But this letter is completely different from the first page. Tessa's handwriting is neat and careful, not the frantic scrawl I expected. She starts by taking full responsibility for everything she did without making a single excuse or trying to justify her behavior. She lists specific things she copied and stole from my life, acknowledging each one individually instead of glossing over them. She writes about what she's learning in therapy about identity disorders and how her behavior stemmed from feeling invisible her entire childhood. She explains that copying me became an addiction she couldn't stop even when she knew it was wrong. The letter goes on for 3 pages, detailing the work she's doing to understand why she felt compelled to steal my entire identity. She writes about group therapy sessions where she had to admit out loud what she did and face how much harm she caused. She describes learning to sit with the discomfort of being herself, instead of pretending to be someone else. Near the end, she makes it crystal clear that she doesn't expect forgiveness or any kind of relationship with me going forward. She writes that she understands if I never want to see or speak to her again, and that she respects whatever boundaries I need to set. She just wants me to know that she's committed to changing and becoming someone who can build her own authentic life. The letter feels genuine in a way nothing else from Tessa has ever felt, and I read it 3 times trying to find the manipulation or hidden agenda. But it's not there, just honest accountability and real self-awareness. Oliver comes home from work that evening and finds me still sitting at the table with the letter spread out in front of me. He kisses the top of my head and asks what's wrong, and I hand him the letter without saying anything. He reads it carefully while I watch his face for reactions. When he finishes, he sets it down and pulls out the chair next to mine. He asks me what I want to do with this letter and how I'm feeling about it. I tell him I'm not ready to respond yet because I need time to process whether this change in Tessa is real or temporary. But I also tell him I appreciate that she seems to be doing real work on herself, instead of just hiding from the consequences. Oliver reaches across the table and takes my hand, and he tells me that whatever I decide about responding will be completely my choice. He reminds me that I get to set all the terms for any future contact with Tessa, and that nobody gets to pressure me into forgiving or reconnecting before I'm ready. He says his job is to support whatever decision I make and to keep protecting our life together from any more drama. His consistent respect for my boundaries and his unwavering support make me love him even more than I already did. We sit there holding hands while the sun sets through the kitchen window, and I feel grateful to have someone who trusts my judgment completely. Wedding planning picks up speed over the next few weeks, and Oliver and I spend our evenings making decisions together about every detail. We sit on the couch with wedding websites open on both our laptops, comparing venues and discussing what feels right for us. We choose a small garden venue that seats 50 people instead of the big ballroom Tessa tried to copy. We pick a simple menu of food we actually like instead of trying to impress anyone with fancy dishes. We select flowers that mean something to us, rather than whatever looks most expensive or trendy. Every single choice we make reflects both of our personalities and values equally. Oliver insists on being involved in all the planning instead of just showing up on the day, and his enthusiasm makes the whole process fun instead of stressful. We decide on a ceremony focused on the commitment we're making to each other, rather than putting on an elaborate show for guests. We write our own vows together at the kitchen table, laughing and crying as we try to put our feelings into words. The whole experience feels authentic and joyful, completely free from the shadow of Tessa's copying behavior. I realize one night while we're addressing invitations that I haven't worried about someone stealing or sabotaging our plans in weeks. The freedom to just enjoy planning our wedding without constant anxiety feels like breathing fresh air after being underwater. My dad calls me on a Saturday morning while I'm grocery shopping to give me an update about Wendy. He tells me that Wendy has started her own therapy to work through her role in enabling Tessa's behavior for so many years. He sounds genuinely hopeful about their marriage for the first time in months as he explains what Wendy is learning about herself. He says the therapist is helping them both understand how they avoided difficult conversations and let problems grow instead of addressing them directly. Wendy is apparently working on understanding why she defended Tessa's behavior even when the evidence was overwhelming. My dad's voice gets emotional when he tells me that they're learning to communicate more honestly with each other after years of just keeping peace. He admits that he let Wendy's defensiveness shut down important discussions about Tessa, and he's working on finding his voice in their marriage. I tell him I'm glad they're doing this work, and that I hope it helps their relationship. But I also make it clear that I'm maintaining my boundaries about how involved I want to be in their process. My dad says he understands and respects that, and he thanks me for even being willing to hear about their progress. After we hang up, I stand in the middle of the produce section, thinking about how much has shifted in just a few months. 3 months after the engagement party disaster, I run into someone at the coffee shop who was there that night. She recognizes me immediately and asks if she can talk to me for a minute about what happened. I brace myself for awkwardness, but instead she thanks me for standing up and exposing the truth that night. She tells me that watching the whole incident actually helped her recognize similar behavior in her own life that she'd been ignoring. She explains that she has a friend who constantly copies her and competes with her in ways that made her feel crazy. She says seeing me refuse to accept Tessa's lies inspired her to finally address the toxic friendship directly. She set boundaries with her friend, and ended up cutting contact when the friend refused to stop the competitive copying behavior. She tells me that she's been so much happier since making that change, and she wanted me to know that my situation helped someone else. I'm genuinely surprised and touched that something so painful for me could end up helping someone else find clarity. We talk for a few more minutes about how women are often taught to tolerate bad behavior to keep the peace, and how important it is to trust your instincts. When she leaves, I sit at my table feeling like maybe all the horrible stuff with Tessa served some bigger purpose I couldn't see at the time. Oliver surprises me the following weekend by announcing he's taking me on a trip to the mountains for just the two of us. He's already packed bags for both of us and arranged time off work without me knowing. We drive 3 hours to a cabin rental surrounded by pine trees and hiking trails, and the isolation feels perfect after months of wedding stress. We spend Saturday hiking along a ridge trail that overlooks valleys of trees turning colors. Oliver holds my hand as we walk, and we talk about our future plans beyond just the wedding. We discuss where we want to live long-term and whether we want kids and what kind of life we're building together. We stop at a lookout point and sit on a fallen log, just breathing in the mountain air and enjoying being completely present with each other. Oliver turns to me and tells me that going through the whole Tessa situation showed him how strong and resilient I am. He says watching me handle everything with dignity while refusing to be gaslit or dismissed made him even more certain about spending his life with me. He tells me that he knows our marriage will be able to handle anything, because we've already proven we can face really hard things together. I lean against his shoulder and feel grateful for this person who sees me clearly and loves me completely. Back home after the mountain trip, I sit down at my desk and decide to write a response to Tessa's apology letter. I keep it brief and focus on acknowledging her efforts in treatment, rather than rehashing everything that happened. I write that I appreciate her taking full responsibility for her actions and that I hope the therapy continues to help her build an authentic life. I make it very clear that I'm not ready for any direct contact beyond this letter, and that I need continued space to heal. I explain that I'm focused on my own life and future right now, and that has to be my priority. I tell her that I wish her well in her recovery, but that our paths need to stay separate for now. Sending the letter feels like closure on my own terms. Not because I owe Tessa anything, but because I'm ready to fully move forward. I seal the envelope and walk it to the mailbox immediately before I can second-guess myself. When I drop it in the slot, I feel something release in my chest that I didn't even know I was holding. A week later, my dad asks if he can come over to talk about something important. When he arrives, he looks nervous as he sits down on my couch. He tells me that Wendy really wants to attend our wedding but understands that Tessa can't be there. He asks if Oliver and I would consider letting Wendy come without Tessa, and he promises they'll respect whatever decision we make. I tell him I need to discuss it with Oliver before giving an answer, and he nods and says he completely understands. That night, Oliver and I talk through all the factors involved in this decision. We discuss how Wendy has made genuine efforts to understand and apologize for her role in everything. We consider how excluding her would hurt my dad, who's been working really hard to make things right. But we also talk about making sure we protect our wedding day from any possibility of drama or discomfort. We finally agree that Wendy can come because she's shown real change and because it matters to my dad. But we make it absolutely clear that Tessa is not invited under any circumstances, and that boundary is completely firm. I call my dad the next morning and tell him our decision, emphasizing that Tessa cannot attend. He sounds relieved and grateful, and he promises that Wendy understands and accepts this boundary fully. The months before the wedding fly by in a blur of normal planning activities and regular pre-wedding stress. I realize one day while confirming vendor details that I haven't thought about Tessa's copying behavior in weeks. When I do think about it, there's no anger or bitterness anymore, just relief that it's over and behind me. The space and time have allowed me to reclaim my complete sense of self without the constant violation of having someone steal my identity. I look at old photos from before Tessa came into our lives, and I recognize myself again in a way I couldn't during those awful months. Oliver notices the change in me too, and comments that I seem lighter and more relaxed than I've been in over a year. The healing has been gradual but real, and I feel ready to start our married life without carrying all that weight. Alicia throws me a bridal shower at her apartment with all my closest friends, and the whole afternoon is filled with laughter and genuine love. We play silly games and eat too much cake and open presents that people actually picked out thoughtfully. Someone mentions the engagement party disaster in passing while we're laughing about wedding horror stories. We all crack up about how absurd the whole situation was, but then the conversation moves on naturally to other topics. The fact that it's become just a weird story we can laugh about rather than an open wound shows how much real healing has happened for everyone. I look around the room at these women who supported me through everything and feel incredibly lucky to have authentic friendships. Alicia catches my eye and raises her glass in a toast to new beginnings and true friends, and everyone cheers. I realize that Tessa's attempt to steal my life actually ended up showing me how strong and real my actual life already was. A week before the wedding, my dad texts asking if we can have lunch together. Just the two of us. I meet him at a small Italian place near his office, and he's already sitting at a corner table when I arrive. He stands up to hug me, and I notice he looks nervous in a way I rarely see. We order food and make small talk about the weather and wedding logistics, but I can tell he has something important to say. After the waiter brings our pasta, Dad pulls an envelope from his jacket pocket and slides it across the table. He tells me he wrote me a letter because he wanted to get the words exactly right. I open it carefully and start reading his handwriting, which is usually messy but this time is deliberate and neat. The letter talks about how proud he is of the woman I've become, how he admires my strength and kindness through everything that happened with Tessa. He writes that he failed me by not protecting me sooner, by dismissing my concerns and choosing peace over truth. He promises to always believe me and support me going forward, no matter what. By the time I finish reading, tears are streaming down my face and I can barely see the page. I look up and see Dad's eyes are red too. I reach across the table and take his hand and tell him I forgive him. I say I'm grateful for all the work he's done to rebuild our relationship and make things right. We sit there holding hands across the pasta, both crying a little, and it feels like something broken has finally healed. 3 days later, a card arrives in the mail with my name written in Wendy's careful handwriting. I almost don't open it, but curiosity wins. Inside is a simple card with flowers on the front, nothing fancy or elaborate. Wendy's message thanks me for allowing her to attend the wedding and acknowledges that she doesn't deserve the grace I'm showing. She writes that she's proud of the woman I am, and deeply sorry for not protecting me when I needed it most. The words are simple and sincere without any attempts to justify or explain away her failures. She doesn't ask for forgiveness, or try to make excuses about being caught between loyalties. She just owns her mistakes and expresses gratitude for my kindness. I read the card twice, then show it to Oliver. He says it sounds genuine and asks how I feel about it. I tell him I appreciate that she's not asking for more than I'm willing to give, that she's respecting my boundaries while still expressing remorse. I put the card in my wedding planning folder, a small acknowledgement of her effort without promising anything more. The morning of my wedding arrives with perfect sunshine streaming through my bedroom windows. I wake up feeling purely happy and excited, with no knot of anxiety in my stomach or sense of dread about what might go wrong. Alicia arrives with my bridesmaids at 9, carrying bags of makeup and hair supplies and mimosas. We blast music and take silly selfies while getting ready, everyone laughing and singing along. The hairstylist arrives and transforms my messy morning hair into an elegant updo while we drink champagne and eat croissants. My bridesmaids help me step into my wedding dress, carefully zipping up the back and adjusting the train. I look at myself in the full-length mirror and barely recognize the confident, radiant woman staring back. This is someone who's been through real challenges and came out stronger, more certain of who she is and what she deserves. Alicia stands behind me in the mirror and tells me I look beautiful, and I realize I actually feel beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with the dress or makeup. I feel like myself, completely and authentically, without any part of my identity stolen or copied or questioned. The ceremony takes place in a garden venue with white chairs arranged in neat rows and flowers everywhere. My bridesmaids walk down the aisle first while the string quartet plays, and then the music shifts to the wedding march. My dad appears beside me looking handsome in his tuxedo, tears already forming in his eyes. He takes my arm and whispers that he loves me, and we start walking toward Oliver. Every step down that aisle feels surreal and perfect, like I'm floating toward my future. I see Oliver standing at the altar in his suit, his best man Bradley beside him, and the look on Oliver's face when he sees me makes my heart skip. His eyes go wide and his mouth opens slightly, and I can see him fighting back tears. When Dad and I reach the front, the officiant asks who gives this woman to be married, and Dad's voice cracks when he says he does. He kisses my cheek and places my hand in Oliver's, then steps back to sit with Wendy. Oliver and I face each other and the officiant starts talking, but honestly I barely hear the words because I'm too focused on Oliver's face. When it's time for our vows, we say the words we wrote together, promises that feel true and real and completely ours. Oliver's voice shakes when he promises to always believe me and stand up for truth, and I squeeze his hands tighter. When the officiant finally pronounces us married and tells Oliver to kiss his bride, the kiss feels like coming home. The reception is held in the same garden under twinkling lights as the sun begins to set. Dinner is served at round tables covered in white linens, and everyone seems relaxed and happy. I'm sitting at the head table with Oliver, holding his hand under the table while we eat and chat with our wedding party. During a quiet moment between courses, I glance around the room and spot Wendy sitting at a table near the back. She's alone at her seat since my dad is currently making rounds talking to guests, and she looks both happy and sad at the same time. Her eyes are on me and Oliver, and there's something wistful in her expression that makes me feel unexpectedly sympathetic. I excuse myself from the table and walk over to her, and Wendy looks surprised when I approach. I tell her thank you for coming, and for respecting our boundaries about Tessa not attending. Wendy stands up and hugs me tightly, and I can feel her trembling slightly. She whispers in my ear that she hopes someday Tessa can be healthy enough to have what I have, to find real love and genuine happiness. I pull back and look at her face and tell her I hope so too, and I actually mean it. I want Tessa to find her own identity and build a life she's proud of, separate from copying mine. Wendy's eyes fill with tears and she nods, understanding that this is all I can offer right now. After dinner, Bradley stands up to give the best man speech and taps his glass to get everyone's attention. He starts with typical stories about Oliver in college, funny moments and embarrassing memories that make everyone laugh. Then he pauses and says he has to address the elephant in the room, and the whole reception goes quiet. My stomach tenses for a second, worried about where this is going. But Bradley grins and says that Oliver and I have proven that real love always wins over fake love, that authenticity beats fabrication every single time. He makes a joke about how at least we know our marriage is real since there's photographic evidence and 100 witnesses, unlike certain other recent engagement parties. The whole reception erupts in laughter, and I look at Oliver, and we both start laughing too. The fact that we can joke about something that was so painful just months ago shows how much healing has happened. Bradley raises his glass and toasts to truth, real love and couples who actually exist, and everyone cheers. Oliver leans over and kisses my cheek and whispers that he loves me, and I feel genuinely grateful for this moment of lightness. Later in the evening, Oliver grabs my hand and pulls me away from the reception toward a quiet corner of the garden. We walk along a stone path lined with lanterns until we're far enough from the party that the music fades to background noise. The sun is setting in streaks of orange and pink across the sky, and Oliver turns to face me with both my hands in his. He tells me this day has been absolutely perfect, because it's been completely authentic to who we are. Every detail, every moment, every person here is real and genuine and ours. We talk about how the whole nightmare experience with Tessa taught us something valuable about the importance of truth in relationships. Oliver says he never realized how much he took authenticity for granted until he watched someone try to steal my entire identity. I tell him that going through it together made me certain I was marrying the right person, someone who would always stand up for truth even when it was uncomfortable. We kiss as the sun disappears below the horizon, and I feel genuinely grateful for the journey that brought us to this moment. The hard parts made the good parts even more meaningful. 2 months after the wedding, I'm unpacking groceries in our apartment kitchen when my dad calls. His voice sounds lighter than it has in months when I answer. He tells me he has an update about Tessa and asks if I'm open to hearing it. I sit down at the kitchen table and say yes, curious despite myself. Dad explains that Tessa completed her intensive therapy program last week and has made significant progress. She's moved to a different city about 3 hours away to start fresh, found a job at an art supply store that she actually enjoys, and is building a life based on her own interests rather than copying others. Her therapist reports that Tessa is doing the hard work of developing her own identity and learning healthy ways to deal with her insecurity. Dad pauses and then asks carefully if I would ever be open to seeing Tessa, maybe having coffee or a brief conversation. I take a deep breath and tell him maybe someday, but I'm not ready yet. I need more time and more evidence of sustained change before I'm willing to open that door. Dad says he understands completely and he's not pushing, just wanted me to know about her progress. After we hang up, I sit at the table for a while thinking about Tessa finding her own path. Part of me hopes she really is getting better, building a life she can be proud of without stealing someone else's. Oliver and I settle into married life in our apartment with surprising ease. We develop our own routines like Saturday morning farmers market trips and Wednesday night cooking experiments. We make plans for our future, talking about career goals and travel dreams, and maybe buying a house in a few years. Oliver supports my decision to go back to the school for my master's degree, and I encourage him when he gets promoted to team lead at work. Everything feels natural and right in a way I never quite experienced before. The foundation of trust and honesty we built during the crisis with Tessa makes our marriage stronger than I imagined possible. We don't keep secrets or dismiss each other's concerns. We communicate openly, even when it's hard. I realized that surviving that challenge together taught us how to be partners in the truest sense, facing problems as a team rather than as individuals. Some nights we lie in bed talking about random things, and I feel overwhelmingly lucky to have found someone who sees me completely and loves me exactly as I am. 6 months after the wedding, I'm working from home when an email notification pops up on my laptop. The sender name makes my heart skip because it's from Tessa. I stare at the unopened email for several minutes, debating whether to read it or delete it immediately. Finally, curiosity wins and I click it open. The message is brief with a photo attached. I open the photo first and see Tessa sitting at a pottery wheel, completely covered in clay, with a genuine smile on her face that I've never seen before. She looks relaxed and happy in a way that seems real rather than performed for social media. The email text is short and simple. Tessa writes that she's discovered she actually loves making pottery and has been taking classes for several months now. She says she's learning to create things with her own hands, rather than taking credit for other people's creations. She thanks me for holding firm boundaries that forced her to find her own path, instead of continuing to copy mine. She writes that she's finally becoming someone she's proud to be, someone with her own interests and accomplishments and identity. The email doesn't ask for forgiveness or request a meeting or push for any kind of relationship. It simply shares her progress and expresses gratitude, asking for nothing from me in return. I read it 3 times, studying the photo of her clay-covered hands shaping something on the wheel. That feels like real growth, the kind that comes from doing the hard internal work rather than just saying the right words. I pull up the email on my phone and show Oliver the photo of Tessa at her pottery wheel. He leans over my shoulder to look at it, and we both study her face for a minute. She looks relaxed in a way I never saw when she lived with us, covered in clay with this genuine smile that doesn't seem performed for anyone. Oliver points out how different she looks compared to all those fake photos she used to post, and I agree. We talk about how the email asks for nothing from me, which feels like real growth instead of manipulation. I decide to write back a short response congratulating her on finding something she actually enjoys and wishing her well with her recovery. Typing out the message feels good because I'm offering support without letting her back into my life in any real way. Oliver reads over my shoulder and says it sounds perfect, supportive but clear about boundaries. I hit send and close my laptop, feeling like this chapter with Tessa might actually be closing in a healthy way for both of us. The boundary protects me while still letting her know I recognize the work she's doing. Alicia texts me asking if I want to meet for brunch on Sunday, and I suggest this new place that just opened downtown. We get a table by the window, order mimosas and avocado toast, and spend the first 20 minutes catching up on normal stuff like work and her new apartment. Then she brings up Tessa out of nowhere, saying she's been thinking about everything that happened over the past year. She tells me how inspiring it's been watching me handle the whole situation, while keeping my sense of who I am through all of it. I feel my face get warm because I'm not used to people saying stuff like that about me. Alicia continues, explaining that watching me set boundaries and stand up for the truth even when people tried to make me doubt myself taught her things about her own life. She mentions a friend who's been copying her style and ideas at work and says my example helped her address it directly instead of just accepting it. I reach across the table and squeeze her hand, touched that something so painful for me could actually help someone I care about. We talk more about boundaries and truth, and how hard it is to trust yourself when people gaslight you. The conversation adds this layer of meaning to what I went through with Tessa. Like maybe it wasn't just about me surviving it, but also about showing other people they can stand up for themselves too. A whole year passes since that disaster engagement party, and Oliver and I decide to host a small anniversary dinner at our apartment. We invite my dad and Wendy, Oliver's parents, Bradley, Alicia, and a few other close friends who supported us through everything. I spend the afternoon cooking while Oliver sets up the table, and we work together in the kitchen like we've been doing this forever. People start arriving around 7, bringing wine and flowers and warm hugs. My dad shows up with Wendy, and they both look relaxed and happy in a way that makes me glad they worked through their problems. Wendy gives me a genuine hug and thanks me again for including her in our lives after everything that happened. Dinner is loud and full of laughter, with everyone talking over each other and sharing stories. Bradley makes a joke about fake engagement parties that actually lands funny instead of awkward, and we all crack up about it. Oliver's mom asks about our honeymoon plans, and we tell everyone about the trip to Greece we're planning for next spring. I look around the table at all these faces, people who believed me when I needed it and celebrated with us when things got better. My dad catches my eye from across the table and smiles, and I smile back feeling grateful for how far we've come. The evening feels warm and comfortable and real in a way that makes me appreciate every person sitting here. After everyone leaves, Oliver and I start cleaning up the kitchen together. He's washing dishes while I put away leftovers, and we're both tired but happy from the evening. He turns to me suddenly and pulls me close, getting soap bubbles on my shirt, but I don't care. He tells me he's amazed by the life we've built together, and I can hear the emotion in his voice. I wrap my arms around him and rest my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Standing there in our messy kitchen with dirty dishes everywhere, I realize something important about everything that happened with Tessa. The whole experience, as painful as it was, taught me something I might not have learned any other way. It showed me the real value of being genuinely known and loved for exactly who I am, not some fake version or copied identity. I have my own achievements that I actually earned, my own experiences that actually happened to me, my own relationships with people who really know me, and my own happiness that nobody can steal or copy. Oliver pulls back to look at me and asks what I'm thinking about, and I tell him I'm just grateful for everything we have. Our future stretches out ahead of us, full of possibilities and plans and dreams that belong to us. I'm excited to create more real experiences and genuine memories with this man I love, and all the people in our lives who truly see us.